Welcome to Shared Lunch, brought to you by Sharesies with BusinessDesk. Sharesies is a wealth development platform whose purpose is to create financial empowerment for everyone. My name is Dan Brunskill. I'm the markets reporter at BusinessDesk. We have a special offer for Sharesies investors from BusinessDesk. If you use the promo code SharedLunch100, you'll get $100 off an annual subscription to BusinessDesk. The offer only applies to new BusinessDesk subscribers and can only be used once per subscriber and cannot be used with any other discounts. Before we get started, here's some important information.
Investing involves risk. You might lose the money you start with. We recommend talking to a financial advisor. We also recommend reading product disclosure documents before deciding to invest. Everything you're about to see and hear is current at the time of recording. Investing.
Also, a reminder, if you have any questions for our guests today, you can submit them through the Ask a Question button down below. Don't leave your questions in the discussion area, as we won't see them there. I can see there's already been heaps of questions asked, so go maybe ask some more and vote up your faves so we make sure we get to the best questions. Please be kind and respectful towards our guest and your fellow viewers, otherwise we will remove you from the webinar. Today we're talking to some of the people who are the wind in the wings of New Zealand Windfarms. Joining me today is the Chief Executive, Warren Koia, and the company's Chair, Craig Stobo. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you very much, Dan.
It's a pleasure to have you, and we can tell from the amount of questions that have come through that Sharesies viewers are very excited to have you. Could you maybe start with just a little introduction on who each of you are and what your role is in the company?
Yeah, thank you, Dan. So I'm a newbie to the company. I joined the company in February as chairperson of the board and have been employed to ensure that the company has a growth strategy and has opportunities for our investors such as Sharesies, whom we're very grateful for as a large group of very interested shareholders. So that's my role as chair.
And my name is Warren Koia. I'm the Chief Executive of NZ Windfarms. I've been with the business for the past 3 and a bit years. My background is primarily funds management, and prior to that I was in the military, but I kind of see myself as the person that keeps an eye on the strategic direction of NZ Windfarms. And for me, I kind of like the doctor, and I bring together multiple and concurrent work streams, and at a point in time where we can deliver milestones and priorities that the board set. So that's me.
And all with military efficiency?
Most of the time we try to. Hey, Dan, I'm getting a bit of feedback in my ear.
Bit of an echo there, Jose.
Yeah.
While you fix that, Dan just might describe the business a little bit more. So it's been operating for a relatively long time. It's on a single site behind Palmerston North. We have 92 turbines spinning in the wind, which normally comes from the west and is a world-class 1A wind site. A team that operates out of Palmerston North, Warren's in New Plymouth, and the board members from throughout New Zealand. A small board of 5 of us, although we have just announced in our annual report released 10 days or so ago that one of our directors, Mark, is retiring at the AGM. So we'll have a board of 4 very shortly. So it's a very focused, small company, but is, I think, one of the greenest companies on the exchange, which excites me, and I'm sure that's one of the reasons why we have so many of your members on our share register.
That's great. And as you say, it is a small company, but it was one of the leaders in wind energy in New Zealand. It was kind of their first. Can you tell us a bit of the background of the story on how there came to be a wind farm and how we've got to where we are today?
Yeah, so very, very potted history, but it grew out of a technology company, Windflow, which was turbine manufacturer, and at the same time the entity was created. The subsequent opportunities for that Windflow manufacturer have diminished. They have sited some of their turbines in some overseas markets, but effectively that technology is behind the current technology on our wind farm. So been going for over a decade. It's had its ups and downs with previous opportunities and histories, and now we have a very clear strategy in front of us, which is to look at repowering the wind farm with new technology. And to that extent, we have applied for and gained consent from the Minister to fast-track the application for reconsenting of the current wind farm with new technology. That is in train. It's public knowledge. We expect to get an answer during the course of the remainder of this calendar year, and I think once we have that option in front of us, we can then make some decisions on behalf of stakeholders as to the next steps. So it's a very exciting phase of the company, and one of the reasons that I joined.
Cool. Can you talk me through what a few of those terms mean? Repower is something that is used in the industry, but perhaps not intuitive to someone like me.
Yeah, so very simply, all technology, all infrastructure has a useful life. And at some point you have to either trust that your maintenance can continue on those wind turbines, but eventually the cost of repair becomes prohibitive. So you need to replace them with new turbines. And so a new consent is required because instead of 92 two-blade wind turbines, we're looking to put in place 30 to 31 new wind turbines that are more modern and much higher in height with much larger energy output that will transform the site. To do that, we have to go through a consenting process with neighbours and councils, etc. And instead of a normal RMA consenting process, which takes a long time, under the new legislation, the government has enabled some companies to apply for a fast-track consent to get through that process faster, and we're one of those companies. So we are at the forefront of fast-track work, and we're also at the forefront of repowering the farm from a existing fleet as opposed to being greenfields and starting from new.
Cool. Okay. So basically, bigger, better wind turbines.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. We had a question among the team. That view from where your farm is on the Palmy Ridge is very iconic. And there's a local team called the Manawatu Turbos, local sports team. Are they named after you? What's the deal there?
I don't have that history and that causality, but I thought so, given that you cannot escape the view, can you, from Palmerston North of the ridgeline with our wind farm and our neighbouring wind farm neighbours with a similar technology or wind fleet across that ridge. So you're right.
I think the rugby unions just latched onto something that's iconic about the region, right? And kind of called themselves the Turbos, and put it on their rugby jersey. But no, good on them, and go the Turbos, right?
But not a team that I support, but I can understand the causality.
That was my next question. What teams do you support, and do the Turbos have a little piece of your heart?
Well, I think I'm a Targa Highlanders fan, but I think, when you work with the community, as we do, you need to make sure you listen to their views on the ridge and what's going up. And the consultation process is really important. We want support from the town, from councils in the region, as well as iwi neighbours, as well as neighbours that have got farms next door or houses. So actually you are part of the community, and it's an important employer in the town. We employ people and their families. So, knowing what the town thinks of the site and working with them is extremely important.
Mm-hmm. Talk to me a little bit about the state of wind energy in New Zealand. We brag a lot about our renewables, but we're not 100% renewable. Most of our renewable is sort of hydro. How much of our renewable power is wind, and how important is wind going to be in the future?
Yeah, so what do you want to have a crack, Warren, or do you want
I can talk a little bit about that, Craig. I mean, up until about 2011, right, there was significant development and interest in wind, and between 2011 and 2019, a lot of that interest kind of petered away because the policy frameworks kind of weren't there to encourage renewable generation. All the new development over that time tended to be in the geothermal space. And I think the Waverley wind farm, which is called Waipapa, was the kind of first one. I know there was one out of Wellington in 2014 that was stood up. But until Waipapa came along, there was, I think it was under 1,000 megs of installed wind capacity. With all of these government policies that have come down the pipe, in terms of the Paris Agreement and all the countries that signed up to that, the Zero Carbon Act, the standing up of the Climate Change Commission in Wellington, the decarbonisation of the electricity sector, decarbonisation of industrial heat processes, the electrification of transportation. There's a big push to renewable electricity in the future, and it's been a lot of modelling done over the last little bit by reputable agencies that suggest up until 2050, in order to meet our climate change targets, we're going to need a wind farm basically a little bit bigger than our repower every year until 2050. So that's a lot of wind to come down the pipe. But there are significant challenges, right, with the consenting and the funding and everything that goes on with wind. And at the moment that seems like a lofty target, but we'll see where we get to. And then with that, there's solar as well, right? So between wind and solar, I mean, we're going to fill that gap that's going to be left with the decommissioning of these fossil fuels and these thermal generation technologies. So we'll see where we go.
Just to add to that, so you get a complete picture of our renewables electricity produced. Just over 80% is hydro. The balance is picked up by other renewables, of which wind is about 6% or so. But the interesting stat is of the energy consumed in New Zealand, only 40% is renewables. And that's not well understood. So to reach a much higher percentage of renewables that doesn't involve building dams, rivers and lakes, does require wind, solar and battery installation to try and help increase the transition away from fossil fuels. Now, Climate Commission has a target of 95% from new technologies. It's going to be, and the government has a higher target. It's just a question of when you sit in front of the economics of the future. There are sort of three things that strike me that people are thinking about. One is energy security. We want to have power in our homes, in our industries. Energy sustainability, so renewables, and there's this interesting thing called price or equity. And one of the challenges that we face as a country is that the investment required that Warren mentioned is immense. Mm-hmm. To do that, we need to have a payback for shareholders. And so the importance of two things continuing has to be mentioned, and that's the trading scheme, the carbon and emissions trading scheme, and also the current structure of the electricity market is really important, that we get the right sort of price signals to enable investment to happen. So you will have, I think, a cost to transition, which is a low electricity price makes it harder to invest. Okay. Higher electricity prices make it easier to invest and for the transition to happen. And that's the interesting feature of the landscape that we all have to think about as a society.
It sounds like you're politely saying that energy prices need to go up to fund the transition to renewables.
Well, yeah, there's been some pushback from industry users of electricity who are unwilling to transition to renewable electricity away from fossil fuels because of the costs. And they face choices. They can pay through the emissions trading scheme for that cost of emission, and the net of that, if that works, then they'll remain where they are. And investors like us who want to produce more renewable electricity need a price signal that tells us it's worth investing in it. So it's a fascinating part of the transition which is not often talked about, but needs to be talked about.
Interesting. So people often talk about how wind or renewable energies end up being cheaper in the long run. Is that still true? And are you just saying that there needs to be a slightly higher payoff during the investment period so that shareholders can earn their return, and then in the long term, energy costs will come back down? Talk me through that.
Well, I think there's enormous upfront capital costs. You think about building a dam, for example, or as we are looking at with the fast track consent to put in place a repowered site or other new installations which require land acquisition, roading, earthworks, etc. There are enormous upfront costs, and to enable a viable project, you need to have visibility of a number of ways of offsetting those costs by de-risking the project. And one of those is the current or spot power price. So you have to be careful about the payback period, don't you? And how much debt you take on to service the capital project, etc. There's a number of elements to a project that requires confidence that the scheme, either the emissions trading scheme or the broad electricity market, won't change in its features, and we can work inside that to structure and roll out those projects.
So you're hoping to hear in the next few months about whether or not the government will consent to you building bigger, better, newer wind turbines on your site.
I think the next step, Dan, is we have to submit our application to the expert consenting panel.
Okay.
And we've signalled to the market that we're going to do that before the end of the calendar year. Now, within the fast track consent process, there are legislated or statutory timeframes with when the expert consenting panel has to get back to us. So we're kind of looking at that Q1, Q2 next year. At the moment, we're putting the finishing strokes on our application. We want to put forward the best consent that we can, so that it makes it easier for the powers that be to approve it, and we get a consent that we can all work with. So that's a bit of that's the next step. The ball's in our court. We've got to submit our consent, and then it's up to the expert consenting panel to decide on it.
Yeah. So just to be clear, it's not the government that decides. The government has given consent to a fast track proposal, so bypassing the normal RMA process. The panel decides, which is normally the outcome from a longer RMA process.
That's right.
And as you said, if you get that consent, there will be a large amount of capital required to invest. Assuming the panel comes back in Q2 or whenever and says, yes, good, go for it, who are you going to call to raise the capital that you would need to then pay for and install those turbines?
Well, there's a question around debt and equity, structuring the project, the vendors with the relevant wind turbines. There's question marks around the type of debt, the type of equity. Our shareholder register is very well supported by retail investors such as your Sharesies members, which is fantastic. So we'll have to look at a combination of existing and new investors, I suspect, but bear in mind that no decision's been made on that, because the key target is to get the consent first and then in the background work around the economics of the project. So we need to think quite strategically about how we do that.
And it sounds like you're saying there are different options. You could raise capital from shareholders, you could take on debt. What about partnering with another energy company that maybe has some capital looking to do some development? Have you talked to any of the other listed energy companies about the prospect of teaming up on this?
Well, I think it's important we understand all the opportunities. So the answer is we're still working through who those partners could be, what their needs are, what our needs are. So early stages.
And do you have an estimate of how much money you would need to do the project? Is that something you've looked into and reported on, or is that still
not decided because we haven't approached any vendors yet?
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Interesting.
Yeah, I think part of that, Dan, is we're in an inflationary environment, right? And it's kind of castles in the sand stuff for a wind turbine manufacturer to give us a quote to supply and install, because everything's moving on them, right?
Yeah. Okay, that's interesting. Sort of facing some of the same increases in cost that the building construction sector is facing.
Same pressures.
So we talked a little bit about the consenting process. It sounds like we need a huge amount of renewable energy to be built. And yet even this fast-tracked consent process doesn't seem to be that incredibly fast. Is there a reason why these consents take so long? And if we need so much energy, why are we not just signing off on every project we can?
Well, if we didn't have fast track, we'd be in the normal RMA process, which is more expensive and will take longer. So I think the government recognises that there has to be a better way of consulting more quickly and efficiently. So we're grateful for that. But we're not a greenfield site. We're brownfield. We're already existing. So for a new developer to have to acquire the land and then go through the consent process is more difficult. So there is a challenge. There is a gap twixt cup and lip, isn't there, between ambitions of the Crown and the Climate Change Commission and our society, and what can be done, the practical nature of that. And that will become more obvious as we get closer to 2030. As Warren mentioned, the scale of what is envisaged and the ability to do that is going to be very challenging.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and
you mentioned you're a brownfield. Oh, you go, Warren.
So, sorry, Dan, if I can just add on to Craig's and this fast track consent matter. I mean, the Ministry for the Environment did some work on that, and they've estimated that on average, successful fast track consent applicants have saved on average 15 months in the consenting process. And then you might go, 15 months, wow. But when you multiply that out by all the lawyers and the planners and the consultants that you have to have on your books, that's a real money saving for little firms like us.
I think the other perspective on this is, at a certain spot electricity price, there will be consumers who think about conservation and saving, etc., as will industry. So it's not clear to me necessarily that there's a direct link between that higher prices don't result in some conservation. So the supply side needn't be as large at lower prices because there'll be some adaptation by the consumer. So it's not all doom and gloom.
Mm-hmm. But there's equally could be increased consumption as we electrify our transport fleet, right? If we have a lot of EVs out there, presumably that means higher demand, even if the spot price is higher.
Yep. Yeah. The use of energy will change. I'm just questioning the speed of that at current prices is the question.
Yeah, Dan, the numbers. Dan, the numbers that I've seen, in terms of electricity demand. I mean, the New Zealand electricity system, round numbers, we use about 41 terawatt hours of energy each year. If we kind of forecast out to 2050, that's expected to rise to 60 terawatt hours. So we're going to jump up by roughly another 50% worth of energy that's required. You take out you take thermal out of the system, then you start adding in solar and wind and offshore wind to fill the slip. Then that's a bit of energy that's required over that 2050. Over that period to 2050, right? And that comes about because of, the electrification of transportation, everyone plugging in their EVs, when they get them in 2030 and 2035, and the electrification of these industrial heat processes that we're talking about. So that's the kind of opportunity for us as a renewable, energy company. And if you look around the world, it's kind of one of the key themes that's underpinning the interest in renewable energy companies such as ourselves, right?
Yeah, so sort of summarise that for us, we are in a fortunate position of being a supplier that can go through a consenting process and get to a larger output. It's harder for others to do that, given what Warren just said around the time it will take normally to go through a longer RMA. And at the moment, the market is looking for more supply.
I was going to ask about that. You have a great site that you can upgrade. How many more onshore sites are there that can be built before we have to start looking offshore, and how soon could that start happening?
Yeah, well, I think there are, it's widely known that there's a stack of onshore sites in Southland and at the bottom of the South Island, the Canterbury Plains and whatnot. There are also, sites that have been consented up north and outer parts of the South Island. But it's kind of the way I look at it. It's not an either or. It's not like we're going to build out all the onshore wind sites before offshore comes to fruition. It's kind of public knowledge that there are 2 offshore wind farmers that are looking at sites. One of them's the NZ Super Fund, and another one's called Blue Float. I believe the company is. One's off the coast of Raglan, and the other one's off the coast of Taranaki in the vicinity of the, Kupe oil well. So, and all these things, it's not an either or. It's not solar or nothing, or onshore wind or nothing, or offshore wind or nothing. It's going to be a bit of a mix, right?
Cool. Yeah. Okay. Interesting. I think we should jump to questions because we have about as many questions as I've ever seen asked at this stage of the cast. So we might as well get into them. The first one, which has the most votes, as a business, where do you expect NZ Windfarms to be in 2030?
Interesting. We're going through a strategic review in the coming weeks around direction that we'd like to take, given what we have, which is a wonderful site. A sector that needs more supply, and what could we be as a company? So I'm not going to say we know that exactly today, because we have a purpose with getting to fast-track consent, which is fantastic, but that's just over the next 3 or 4 months. And after that, we make some decisions around repowering the site. But I think if you think about the history of the business and its operational excellence with the team we have, there are options for us to grow, and that may be into a broader renewable space. It may be the wind space by itself. I think that's a question that directors and staff need to think about over the next 2 or 3 months ahead of this consent, which will be a very valuable part of our assets, is to have that consent. So we are in the green energy space, there's no question about that, and green energy is an exciting sector. We're monitoring developments around New Zealand and overseas. So it's really a question of what we could be, and that will be determined over the course of the next 3 or 4 months.
Interesting. Anything to add on that, Warren?
Yeah, I think the next 10 years are going to be very different to the last 10 years that we've been through, right, for the company. And for me, that's exciting. It's invigorating. That's the reason why people like myself and Craig and others on the board and the company are involved in this, in it, right? Because we see a future that's obviously brighter, and we've got a whole lot of tailwinds behind us, and it's up to us to maximise every single opportunity for the benefit of shareholders.
We've got a question here from Cliff Cookson, who asks, could you tell me how Windfarms will maintain power output while growing dividends and the share price while carrying out the proposed repower venture? I think in a sense asking what will happen financially to the company while you are if you replace the turbines. Will you have to stop generating power? Yeah. Will you stop generating dividends? What happens there? Yeah,
great question. So we have a dividend policy of paying at least 7% of our cash flows out to our shareholders as dividends. So it has an income characteristic. When you move into growth, you have to think about how you're going to fund that growth. And so you have external investment or you fund it out of working capital, including the dividend stream that is currently in place would have to be reviewed. So that question hasn't been answered yet. In terms of transition, it's not as though we take all the wind turbines out at once and replace them. So there'll be a gradual transition over time. With the existing electricity networks on site that gets us to the grid. So we don't have to upgrade the site in some respects, but obviously we have to work with the node and the mechanism to get from where we are to that node, and with Transpower. So there's a few more things to happen under the windmill, so to speak, before that. But the question asked is a good one. Financially, the company needs to think about how to finance the project, and all things would have to be considered.
Yeah, but it sounds like you're saying that when the actual work is happening, you don't have to unplug the power supply, you can keep supplying and earning, and revenue will keep coming in.
That's right. If I can answer that, Craig, yeah, the plan is to stand up, new towers, keep a portion of the old wind farm going, and then when a portion of the new towers are ready to be energised, the balance of the wind farm will be. Balance of the old wind farm will be turned off, and the new wind farm will be turned on, and then it'll be progressive kind of after that. And just given that even if you chop out half of the call it half of the wind farm, and then stand up new turbines, then that should be sufficient revenue. There'll be a sweet spot there where we can work out what the right balance of old operating while the new's being constructed and so forth.
Okay. Helpful. Thank you. A question that I haven't fact-checked, but I will throw it to you. Chris B asks, why does only one director hold shares in the company? So first, is that true? And if yes, why?
Yes, it's true. Mark Evans is a shareholder and director of the company and has been a vociferous advocate for the company and been a great company director. The other directors have not so far, not to say that they won't. Does that concern me? No. All the directors advocating for stakeholders and looking after the company with a duty of care, yes, they are.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Chris again asks, can the land used for the turbines be optimised by adding in solar infrastructure, either owner-operated, subleasing the land, or in partnership with a solar generating company? Any prospect for solar there?
Yeah, great question. That's one of the questions I asked when I joined. You've got this land asset, what else can we do with it? So, Warren, did you want to pick up where we're at with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's one of the things that we're looking at kind of separately is the maximisation of all the assets that we got. So that it's maybe it's solar, maybe it's a grid scale battery, maybe it's planting some form of pine trees or manuka on the balance of the land, or maybe it's the continuation of the cattle grazing operation that's on there at the moment. We don't know, but we've asked people that are knowledgeable in this space to give us some ideas, and then if it's got any legs, then we'll push it further. But great question.
Ken asked a question. We've canvassed a little bit, but with a slightly different angle. He says, can you give us an update on where the repowering project is and when you expect shovels to be on the ground? If you'll allow me to reframe it slightly, if the consent goes ahead, do you have some scenarios about when you might think you might be able to start work? Is that something you've scenario planned or forecast?
Well, the key thing to understand is once it's granted, you've got a sort of a 2-year window. So in our minds, it's working at sort of in parallel with the decision-making process around the economics of the project that we've discussed, the partners that we need to bring into the project, the economics of that, and then how do you project manage that? So they're all in the mix at the moment, and I can't give you a date because we haven't got the consent and we haven't made the decision to repower until we get the consent.
Yep. Another question from Cliff. He asks, can you tell me what the working life of the current wind turbines is? And again, how they'll be phased out. But what is the current lifespan of the turbines that you have at the moment?
I think for Cliff, if he has a look at the impairment notes in our annual report that we released the other week, it's got a pretty good description of what we think the operating mode will be out to 2041, which is the kind of date that we've pegged as the remaining useful life for the current fleet. And in 2041, it may not look like, at the moment we've got 92 turbines. Out to 2041, we're expecting a bit of a sinking lid on the numbers. And, we've looked overseas and all the wind farms that have kind of at that 25, 30, 35-year age, I mean, that's the kind of operating modes that they adopt. That's not to say that they can't go on any longer, but that's a date that we're comfortable to, put out there in the marketplace.
Yeah, so that's like for impairment purposes, practically speaking, with non-destructive testing, with our asset management plan, recycling kit, they could last a lot longer, but prudence suggests we need to have a realistic number for the accounts, and you can see that from the annual report.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And presumably replacing them will obviously extend that lifespan significantly.
Well, replacing them means they're no longer required, so we have a new fleet. So that becomes redundant, doesn't it?
Yeah. I think the question I was really getting at there was what would be the lifespan of the new turbines?
I beg your pardon. Well, what do you think, Warren, given our experience with overseas?
Yeah, the lifespan of the new turbines, we think will be in that 25 to 30 year. At least at this stage, 25 to 30 years is the best estimate.
Okay. That's a shorter number than I expected, perhaps. It's almost like these older ones have a longer lifespan than the newer ones.
No,
Am I misunderstanding that?
Yeah, not necessarily. I mean, that's it's similar to the Auckland Harbour Bridge analogy, right? That was the Auckland Harbour Bridge was built, in the middle of last century, and that's still going, right? But any bit of mechanical kit can carry on operating. It just depends on how much money and how much capital you want to spend on it.
Right. There's a sense that you're keeping your older turbines alive.
We're looking after them, that's for sure. And to Warren's point, if you were to look after new wind turbines with the same kind of asset management plan, you'd expect the life to last. So at the beginning, you have to have a number, and then it's up to the operational management of those fleets to extend them as long as you possibly can.
Okay, cool. Let's jump back into some more questions. Ollie asks, as an electricity generator, what is your relationship like with the gentailers? And I suspect he's asking about the big ones that both generate electricity and sell it direct to consumers.
Yeah, they're an important part of our client base, actually. Not all of them buy from us, but as a wind merchant in the wholesale marketplace, the gentailers can be clients as well as competitors in the wind space. So it's interesting, isn't it, when you're kind of collaborating with competitors, because they also need a mix of energy supplies and the distribution of their product to their customers.
I mean, yeah, but Dan, I mean, the way we operate our wind farm, we just try and be good neighbours, right? We've got two neighbours, we've got two neighbouring wind farms, and an example of that, one of the wind farms under construction, they wanted to haul their blades through our wind farm, and we had a conversation and come up with an agreement, and that's how things work, right? We all try and help each other out, and that's certainly the attitude of this company to all our stakeholders and neighbours and whatnot.
Can I throw a difficult question to you about financing? It's the most technical question I've seen asked on this webinar, but I think we should go for it. Chris asks, if property, plant and equipment is being depreciated 3 million a year, assets of property, plant and equipment is increasing by 3 million per year, is the net 6 million coming from land revaluations, or what are the significant asset changes that is meaning the tangible assets the company has is flat year on year, even though the equipment is depreciating?
I'm not quite sure what the question is in sense. Is it a funding and depreciation question? That's not clear.
I think what he's asking is that the equipment is being depreciated, but your net tangible assets each year is remaining flat.
Yeah. Okay.
How is that so?
Well, there's a revaluation this last period from land values. That's correct. And also the power price affects the valuation of the improvements. So the spot power price has been obviously a lot higher in the past, so that's the reason.
Okay, super useful. Here's an interesting question. There is a new tulip-style vertical wind generator. Any plan to use them? Are they any better than the horizontal ones we sort of know and love?
Yeah, I don't think there's any. I don't think there's any desire to move away from something that's tried and tested and it's got millions and millions of hours of operation all over the world, right? So, what we're proposing to put up is a tower structure of about somewhere between 80 and 90 metres high with a cell on top, which is basically the box that houses all the wind turbine equipment inside, with 3 blades, up to that 117 metre diameter. Cool.
No tulips in the Manawatu then. It's a pity because the tulips would be a great name for a rugby team.
Maybe in Holland, right?
Maybe in Holland. Georgia asks, you spoke about having a relationship with local iwi. Can you expand on what this relationship looks like and what it means in practice?
Yeah, so one of the consent processes through the RMA is to consult with neighbours, including our iwi neighbours, and I've met personally with one already. We've got another meeting next week and have had discussions between management and the other iwi, and they are cordial relationships. They're important relationships, and we have to respect their history and their involvement in the land that we're on. And so collaboration, again, which is, as Warren said, is a feature of our business, is important with our iwi neighbours as well.
Another question here that is commonly asked when we talk about wind power. Somebody asks, how do turbines keep up with demand when there's not any wind to run them? I wonder if you could unpack that for us a little bit. How does the network work when there's no wind? Who's supplying electricity? How does that all?
Yeah, I think the way the system's designed as it works. I mean, everyone's got weather forecasts, right? And you can get pretty close to what the output is of various wind farms, and then if you know what that might be or may not be, then you can add other generation types to fill the slip. At the moment, all the hydro lakes are full. Lake Taupō's full, and it's pretty much all hydro with a little bit of geo and any wind that's operating. So I think we don't look at it as wind and wind only. The system is made up of multiple sources of generation types all over the country, right?
So in summary, if the sun is not shining and the wind is not blowing, then our water batteries, our hydro, takes the load, and if the hydro's not available, you've got to move to fossil fuel. And you've seen that the impact of that in the last 6 months ahead of the July-August rains, where we were importing Indonesian coal to fire our fossil fuel power plants. So there are consequences from dry years, no wind and no sunshine, where you're going to need base load of some kind that is either batteries, which is still not yet prevalent worldwide, but is coming, or you have water batteries, hydro, or you need some sort of base load from in New Zealand's case, fossil fuels, because we don't have nuclear. So to sort of summarise, the system tries to take into account all the different sources. The best outcome is wet winter, filling up the lakes, winds blowing, the sun shining, and then everyone's happy. We don't have interruptions, but that's not real. That's not the way outcomes manifest themselves.
Mm-hmm. So you need a diverse range of sources and some sort of base load as well that you can switch on regardless of.
Yeah, well, I guess the societies needs to figure out 100% renewable is aspirational. In practice, nature isn't necessarily friendly all the time. So how do we cater for that residual outcome where natural outcomes aren't available? Is it storage of other means other than hydro? Is it conservation, or is it a base load that requires non-renewable energy?
Yeah, Dan, that matter's been looked at by the government, right? They call it the New Zealand Battery Project, which is basically, the Lake Onslow pumped hydro scheme. Everyone in the industry has got their own views on that project, but look, we're just open to hearing what the consultants are going to say in their feasibility study, and then I think we should take our cues from that.
Okay, I think we're pretty much out of time, but do you have any parting thoughts, any one key takeaway for listeners to go home with?
Well, a couple of things. One is thank you very much for your support and for hosting Dan today. On behalf of the board and management, we really appreciate the questions and the interest, which is wonderful. We do believe we're one of the greenest companies on the exchange. We are in the renewable space. We've had a very successful, in fact, second best, I think, year financially on record for the last 12 months, and you'll see that in our annual report. And we would welcome questions and feedback directly to us. as you get to understand us better, we get to understand your thoughts and aspirationally where you think the company should go. After all, you are the owners of the business. We are directors on your behalf, and your views as business owners are important to us. So on behalf of Warren and I, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak to you all.
Brilliant.
Yeah, thank you, folks.
Well, thank you so much for coming on, and yeah, thanks for tuning in, and a big thanks to Craig and Warren for joining us. We really appreciate your time and insights. Great to hear from you.
Thank you.
Thanks, folks.
Next week on Shared Lunch, we'll be discussing how to invest in line with Te Ao Māori principles. Our guide for this will be Tipini Kapakingi. A link to register for that discussion should be in the chat right now. It will be a good view. My colleague Francis is hosting. It will be, so tune in, come along. Until next time, enjoy the rest of your week and stay safe.